Hey guys, this is Joe from Analog Archive. Video today is going to be a topic-based video instead of just some vinyl finds. I wanted to talk today about my journey through jazz and ultimately where I am at right now when it comes to collecting jazz and specifically free jazz. So I've talked really since I've made my channel the last few years about how I got started with jazz through guitar players like Grant Green, Kenny Burrell, and then branching out from there to explore not only different artists like Stanley Turrentine, Hank Mobley, John Coltrane, Donald Byrd, Lee Morgan, players like that, but also different labels, Blue Note Prestige, Riverside, Muse, Cobblestone, and the list kind of continues on. But as I said, the focus today is going to be on my journey through jazz and ultimately how I've progressed from where I started with hard bop being kind of the main listening, at least when it came to jazz, and where I am at now, which is just mostly just free jazz. So this is kind of a video that's both for kind of personal, just for me to kind of talk about my experience and my journey through different genres or different subgenres of jazz, but also as a way for people that maybe have been collecting jazz for a while that are interested in exploring different avenues of the genre to be able to kind of see a potential way. So we'll get started. This journey has kind of been going on for about 2 years, and I really pinpointed it back to when I bought this record. So this is Elvin Jones live at the Lighthouse. Before buying this, as I said just a minute ago, most of my jazz listening was just hard bop, maybe some more modal, post bop type stuff, but for the most part, it was very straight ahead, just hard bop, 50s, 60s, Blue Note, Prestige, Riverside type jazz. And I remember seeing this record countless times, both online being shown, but also in different situations at stores. And I took a listen to it, and at first it just felt like too much for me. The saxophone playing of Dave Liebman and Steve Grossman just felt like it was pushing it a little bit beyond where I was. Eventually, I decided that I wanted to take a chance with this, and I listened to it, and after really listening to it on vinyl, it was a totally different experience. I know I've heard people talk about that, and I definitely feel the same way, that when you listen to something on vinyl, it definitely gives you a different listening experience than if you just simply stream it. So that was definitely the case for this. So after listening to this, I was really enamored by the saxophone playing of Dave Liebman, Steve Grossman, and specifically Dave Liebman. I had looked up both of their discographies on Discogs, and I saw that Dave Liebman's discography was a little bit easier to attain. He had a much larger breadth of kind of content and different albums that he had released dating back to the 70s. And so he was kind of my main focus at the time. And the first record that I picked up of his was this record. It's called Pendulum. Dave Liebman, this has him on tenor and soprano sax, Randy Brecker trumpet, Richard Bayark is on the piano, Frank Tusa bass, Al Foster drums. And this one pretty much picked up right where the Live at the Lighthouse session had left off. Very post-bop, almost, really wouldn't call it free, but more of an avant-garde type sound. Very just in-your-face saxophone playing, and that was kind of the direction that I went. And I continued to pick up more and more Dave Liebman. I found some Steve Grossman, and I started exploring some other artists. And another artist that came up that had a lot of releases was Billy Harper. And so I found this record about a year and a half ago. This is Billy Harper Quintet in Europe. This one has him in the forefront, very saxophone heavy record, but was exactly what I was looking for when it came to continuing to push the boundaries of what I was interested in listening to when it came to jazz. So this one, as the title kind of alludes to, was in Europe, very energetic, very aggressive playing from Billy Harper, and it kind of took the Dave Liebman one a little bit farther. It was more of that push towards the avant-garde type sound. So that was definitely moving me in the direction a little bit away from the hard bop, that structure, and getting more into it being more improvisation, longer solos, maybe not as much of the emphasis on the melody of the tracks, and that was definitely kind of that push, that direction that I was going. But I would say of all records that have really moved me into the direction of free jazz was John Coltrane's Live at Birdland. This was one of the first John Coltrane albums that I purchased. I think this was actually the first Impulse record that I had bought. And this one definitely, after a first listen, it felt a lot for me. It was, in my opinion at the time, it was abrasive. It was a tougher listen. But it was also very enjoyable. I really could feel that the emotion from John Coltrane's saxophone. I could feel the energy of not only just the musicians, but also from just kind of the atmosphere in general. And this one was really, as I said, the one that moved me in that direction of the kind of free jazz, it becoming more improvisation, and a little bit harder of a listen. So this one was a great one. I've talked about this record before. I think this is a great record to kind of start with if this is something that you haven't heard and you're interested in moving past some of the more traditional kind of hard bop type jazz. This is definitely a good one to bridge that gap. So that's Live at Birdland. And then obviously after that, I started getting more into John Coltrane, and of course there's so much hype around A Love Supreme, just his masterpiece of an album. The first listen I had of this, it was an experience that I really have had very few similar experiences since then. It was just an absolutely amazing listen. I was absolutely captivated by not only John Coltrane, McCoy Tyner's piano, and just overall just an amazing listen. And this one definitely pushed the boundaries more than what you'd see with the Live at Birdland, more spiritual, moving more into that avant-garde. A lot of people say you could definitely hear John Coltrane getting into that later era sound that you'll hear in like 66, 67. But this is a very good record as well. This is, for a lot of people, this is a very early jazz record they picked up. That was not the case for me. I started collecting jazz in like 2019, and I didn't pick this up till I think it was maybe 2021. So it was about 2 years of collecting jazz before I got this record. So, but again, continuing to move into that more free direction as you got into this. That record by all means is not free jazz. There's definitely still that restraint that Coltrane has with his playing, but you are moving more into that avant-garde, that spiritual sound with it. Another area where I feel that has helped me continuing to broaden the sound, that the kind of what I'm comfortable listening to when it comes to jazz, is Coltrane's posthumous releases. Now I just picked a few. This is not a just kind of comprehensive look, but these are some that I definitely feel that if you are trying to push it even farther than what you hear Love Supreme, but you don't want to go as far as what I'll kind of talk about in just a few minutes, this is a nice in-between. So something like Interstellar Space, this is a duo between Coltrane and Rashid Ali. This is one of his last recordings. This was recorded in like February 1967. He died in July of 67, so it was only 5 months before his death. In my opinion, this is almost a step back from what you hear from some of the later, or the real late era Coltrane ones, like Ascension, Ohm, records like that, even Meditations, maybe potentially. But with Interstellar Space, you hear Coltrane in a much different light than what you ever would hear, really, on pretty much any other record that he's on. He's very rarely ever not accompanied by less than 3 or 4 musicians other than himself. And so to have him just be with Rashid Ali on the drums, you definitely get a different sound. This is moving into that free jazz. I mean, it probably, in many people's opinions, would be considered free jazz avant-garde. This is not wild. If this is wild to you, then you probably need to take a step back, look at some other stuff again, go back to things like Love Supreme, even the album that came after that, the John Coltrane Plays, the Chim Chimery album, things like that, or Crescent. Those albums will help to prepare you for albums like this. But by all means, again, this is a nice in-between of just real wild free jazz and more like just spiritual avant-garde stuff. So this is a great one. Another one, this is, in my opinion, probably my favorite posthumous release. This is First Meditations. So this was recorded in, like, I think it was August of 65, or September 2nd, 1965. This is one of his last albums that he did with his classic quartet, before moving into kind of his second quartet with, or not even quartet, with quintet with like Rashid Ali, Alice Coltrane, Pharaoh Sanders. But this is, again, another one very similar to Interstellar Space, a nice in-between. You definitely hear the free moments on this, but I don't think that this really pushes the boundary as much as what you'd hear on other free jazz records that I'll talk about in just a few minutes. This is another good in-between point. This was, again, recorded in 65. This didn't come out until 1977, so this is on the green label, Impulse. This is a great one to pick up if, again, you want to hear more of that push out there. This is definitely a great one. And I will preface this so I don't forget to say this in the video. There are other artists that I've kind of influenced this journey as well, like Eric Dolphy and even like Sam Rivers, that I'm not going to showcase in this because it didn't really fit into the timeline exactly. That was just something that was part of the journey. So I just wanted to kind of preface that. Continuing on, another Coltrane one, getting more free at this point. This is Cosmic Music. This one is split between tracks that have Coltrane on it. I think there's 4 tracks on this, and it's like 2 and 2. 2 tracks have Coltrane, 2 tracks don't. Pharaoh Sanders is on this one as well, along with his wife, Alice Coltrane. This was a later release. I don't know for a fact exactly when this was released, but one thing I've also noticed with John Coltrane as well that I think marked his kind of departure from modal avant-garde type jazz that he played predominantly in the 60s is when he starts to play other instruments. So you hear him on the bass clarinet, you hear him on the flute. As he kind of explored different sounds, he also explored different instruments as well. Now, obviously, that's not true. You hear, like, My Favorite Things, you hear him on the soprano sax, some other early Impulse, same thing. So it's not 100% that's a fact, but especially as he got into the bass clarinet and the flute, you start to hear more of that out kind of sound. And this one definitely fits that, more free. This is a tough listen, especially if you are not accustomed to hearing free jazz. This is really the first one that is that significant push into free jazz. I think the other ones like the First Meditations and the Interstellar Space are more, they're a little bit more approachable than what you have. Now, I just mentioned Pharaoh Sanders. He was kind of the next push, and he was really that significant push into some more free jazz stuff. So just a few records. Karma was an early one that I picked up. This one was an Acoustic Sounds reissue, so you can definitely find this one. This is very symbolic of the early 70s free jazz, kind of a continuation of what Coltrane was doing in the mid to late 60s. And this is definitely a great one. Has definitely some serious free jazz moments to it. You've also got some vocals as well from Leon Thomas. So that's definitely something to get used to. But this is a great one if you're exploring more in that spiritual free type sound. And that was kind of that push as well. This is another one, another Pharaoh Sanders. I love this album. This is one of my favorite of his Impulse releases. This is Jules of Thought. This was around the same time as Karma. I think this one actually came, this one is, I'm not sure if it has the year on the back. 1970 is when this was released. So this one came after Karma, I'm pretty sure, because I think Karma was 69. I might be wrong with that, but this is another one, continuing with free jazz. Leon Thomas is on this one as well. Free jazz moments as well. And again, for me, continuing to feel more and more comfortable at this point with more free jazz type sounds. That was the direction. Another Coltrane one that really marked my arrival into the free jazz kind of sound, and that is Ascension. Many people, really most people, would agree that this is a very difficult listen. This is not something that you'd come home from a hard day's at work and listen to this. This is very abrasive, very just kind of just a like a room of sound, and it's very difficult at times to pick out who's playing what instruments. It's just a lot of sound at one time. So the kind of being able to get into something like this takes some time. I think from really where I started getting into more free jazz to this was probably maybe a six month to a year span. And for some records, it kind of goes back and forth. Some of them I've had for a year and a half, 2 years. And so it takes a while to get into this. This is not easy to just jump right into, but is another step into even more free moments. So this also has Pharaoh Sanders on it. You've got Marion Brown, another amazing free jazz player. He's influenced that sound for me as well. A lot of his ESP disc stuff, along with like his Impulse stuff. John Chakai is on this. Archie Shepp, Pharaoh Sanders. So you've got some real big saxophone names in jazz on this record. So, and again, it's very abrasive, it's a challenging listen. But that's a challenging listen. This is, I think, at the same level or even potentially above that. This is Art Ensemble of Chicago, BYG Actual 29. Found this record a little before Christmas. It was like the beginning of December. Some of those Pharaoh Sanders ones were around like Thanksgiving of this past year. So we're not really talking very long. We're only talking like about maybe eight to 10 months ago that most of these records have entered my collection and have influenced the sound. So this is a very tough listen as well, similar to Ascension. Wall of sound, hard to tell what exactly is being played, what instruments, things like that. But is, again, a continuing step in that free jazz direction, very free at this point. Now, I would say that the final kind of piece that has led me up to pretty much where I am now is when I started collecting ESP disc titles at Christmas time of this year. So one of the first ESP discs that I picked up was Albert Ayler's album called Bells. This was, I think, the second ESP disc that I picked up. This is a single-sided record. It's only about 20 minutes or so, 22 minutes. of music. Very free. Albert Ayler is definitely not something that's easy to move into. You have to work your way up to that, but is a nice continuation of the free jazz sound. So again, as I said, the ESP disc title, so things like Bells, or to show these kind of quicker, Spiritual Unity, Albert Ayler Trio, very really abrasive, really hard, edgy sound that Albert Ayler had with the saxophone. You definitely get that full picture of what free jazz is when you listen to Albert Ayler. Another great ESP disc one is Giuseppe Logan Quartet. Another ESP disc one, another saxophone or reed-led album, and that push, that continued real free moment, free kind of sound to it. So all of these albums really have a very similar sound, a really similar theme to it. The melody is not really something that is ever established. Some of these tracks, or sorry, some of these albums, the tracks on them right at the beginning of the track, it's just this immediate explosion of sound. And for many of them, there was really no kind of softening of that until the end of the track, or even in many cases, the end of the album. Perfect example of that is Frank Lowe, Black Beings. I remember when I saw this album, probably maybe late 2022, streaming this one, it was way too much for me to handle. And at that point, I had started to get into Pharaoh Sanders. It was before I started collecting ESP discs, but I was starting to become more comfortable with the free jazz sound. But this one was just to another level. There's a lot of screeching and honking. Frank Lowe is blowing really hard into his horn. You can hear that. And it's a tough listen, but it's also enjoyable when you get into, again, that free jazz sound. But this is free jazz almost to the max. And that kind of leads us, or I should say, that kind of takes us to where I'm at right now, which is collecting especially like Peter Brotman. So one title, one of the early ones that I picked up back in May. I don't know if this is Chacus, Peter Brotman, Fred Van Hove, Han Benek, just free jazz. Really, at this point, it's not even as much free jazz. It's more like what they consider free improvisation. A lot of different sounds, a lot of different instruments are employed in this. Again, as I just mentioned, theme of this is very open sound. There is not that adherence to a melody or anything like that. It's just a very open kind of sound. So those are just a handful of records that kind of, again, as I said at the beginning, my journey into free jazz, as I continue to embrace, and I continue to find albums that at first listen are tough to kind of experience and are tough to listen to, but as you push yourself, I think that's one of the great things about collecting jazz, and especially collecting just records in general, is the fact that there is always that push, that need for trying to find a sound that you want to kind of hear and be able to experience. Most of these, really all of these albums are 50, 60 years old, but they still hold true today. But it's definitely an acquired taste. It's not easy to get into it. A lot of channels that I've watched that collect jazz, there's not a lot of free jazz mentioned, whether it's just a lot of free jazz, it's tough to find. A lot of it is European-based labels, or it's just the records, the pressing quantity was very little, and so it's challenging to find these records. But it's also, you can't deny the elephant that's in the room with the fact that it is a very challenging listen. And for those that were just like me, it started with hard bop, with titles like Midnight Blue and Green Street and Workout and Roll Call and all these other just classic Blue Note titles. And same goes again for kind of prestige as well. It is a big step into the free jazz realm, but I hope that what I've shown in this video is the fact that there is kind of a step-by-step pathway into it. You don't have to jump into titles like Frank Lowe, Black Beings, or Ascension, John Coltrane, or even like Peter Brotman. You can take those baby steps and you can work your way up. And I hope that not only did I show that, but also showed some titles that can help to move you in that direction if you are interested. Now, for me, especially with jazz, I think that jazz is such a exciting genre to collect, simply based off the fact that there's so many different avenues that you can take depending on where you're coming from, depending on maybe what albums have been shown to you. If you're someone that's coming from a metal side or punk or classical or whatever, your approach to collecting jazz is going to be different. And for some, it could be an easier jump into the free jazz realm. So I really just wanted to make this video to not only, again, show some people some stuff that can be a good bridge from maybe what type of jazz you've been listening to into what you could potentially explore, but also to just shine a light on free jazz, which is, again, not something that's really talked about a whole lot. I hope to kind of continue to make more of these topic-based videos in the future. If you liked this, please think about liking and subscribing if you have not already, and I will see you in the next vinyl video. Bye.